I walked into Sterling Dynamics on a Monday morning as calm as any other. Inside that familiar glass building, the low hum of the servers and the faint smell of over roasted coffee from the automatic machine blended together like the usual opening cue for a workday. I always joked with my team that this company could survive without a lot of things, but never without caffeine and a stable operations system. And somehow, I ended up responsible for both. My name is Madison Clark. I am 34, head of technical operations, the person in charge of every system North Star Utilities relies on, and they are Sterling's biggest client. For the past 6 years, I have lived inside system logs, 3 a.m. alerts, and those urgent calls from North Star demanding a full diagnostic. But I never complained. I am the type who gets sharper when things fall apart, like my mind was built to stare chaos in the eye. North Star is not a normal client. They manage power systems across several states. A single hiccup in their data stream can cost millions and leave thousands affected. The stability I maintain is not just corporate housekeeping, it keeps a part of the country running. Once, someone from North Star told me over a call that if I ever left, they would take the contract with me. I laughed it off back then, thinking it was just a polite compliment. It took me a long time to realize they meant every word. I stepped into the office at 7:48 in the morning, just in time to review the incident dashboard before my team arrived. Two yellow alerts popped up, a data packet moving slower than normal. One look and I already knew the fix. Reroute the pipeline, optimize the buffer, and verify the backup link. 8 minutes of work. Then 8 minutes became 7, then 5, and eventually 3.5. Over time, I turned into the person everyone automatically relied on whenever something felt off. The chief executive officer once said I was like the backbone everyone leaned on without realizing it. Maybe he was just trying to boost morale, but he was not wrong. Somewhere along the way, I became part of Sterling's operating structure. Around 8:30, my team started showing up. Jake waved at me with a giant latte in his hand. He cannot function without milk-heavy coffee. Lena walked in with her headphones on, listening to a true crime podcast before she even powered up her computer. We are a strange group, but somehow we are seamless. 6 years of near disasters will do that to people. While I was reviewing our weekly report, an email slid into my screen. The subject line was short, a company-wide meeting at 9 in the morning. The body had only 3 sentences. Sterling was introducing a new senior leader overseeing operations. His name was Brandon Hale. I did not know much about Brandon beyond the rumors floating around. Young, Master of Business Administration from a well-known school, good with slides. Supposedly, the kind of person leadership hoped would bring fresh energy. The part people whispered was that he was the son of one of Sterling's biggest investors. Whenever news like that shows up, it is rarely good for people like me. A person like him would want to make a mark, and marks like that tend to land right on top of operations, the very thing my team spent years stabilizing. My stomach tightened as the meeting synced automatically to my calendar. Company-wide meetings are not usually a big deal, but something about this one pressed against my instincts. Too much had been shifting inside Sterling lately. Extra hallway conversations, new formats for reports, changes no one bothered to explain. No one said the word, but I could feel it. Sterling was preparing for a restructuring. I have always operated on data, not gut feelings, but this morning the unease was stronger than anything I could calculate. Not fear, just the intuition of someone who has worked long enough to know that a new name in the chain of command can shift an entire system off its axis. I closed the logs and glanced at the time. 12 minutes to go. I straightened my back, finished the last sip of coffee, and grounded myself. Anything could happen. But whatever it was, I knew my place in the system. I was not loud. I did not need the spotlight. I was the one who kept everything running. What I did not know was that this quiet morning was about to mark the first tremor in a chain of events no system analysis could ever predict. Right before clicking join meeting, I caught myself wondering how many people had felt this exact knot in their stomach before a supposedly harmless meeting. If you are listening to this right now, tell me where you are listening from. Office stories come in different shapes, but that sudden pull into unexpected chaos is universal. And if you are into the kind of journeys where you stand up at the exact right moment, where the comeback looks soft but cuts deep. Keep listening. We are just getting started. The company-wide meeting started at 9 in the morning. I turned on my camera and adjusted the angle to match the light in the small conference room. The screen split into dozens of squares, familiar and unfamiliar faces scattered across them. I saw a few senior leaders appear in the front row before the chief executive officer unmuted himself, his voice formal but tired. He talked about restructuring, about the need for change to stay competitive, and about the new face who would lead the operations division. Brandon Hale appeared right after. He turned on his camera, wearing a wide smile, the kind of smile people use when they walk into a room already expecting every spotlight to follow them. His hair was styled in that perfect arc young high achievers on business magazine covers seem to favor: dark blue suit, light tie, the kind of confident posture you only have when you have never doubted yourself for even a second. Brandon introduced himself with a gentle but commanding tone. He highlighted his Master of Business Administration from a prestigious school, listed a few supposedly remarkable wins at his previous company, and emphasized his vision for a new operational model for Sterling. Words like agility, hyper-efficiency, next generation and pipeline, and cost-optimized operation came out so often that I could not tell if he was speaking or reading a pitch written by someone aiming to impress a boardroom. What caught my attention more than his introduction was the way his eyes paused on certain squares, as if evaluating who was worth his attention. I knew I was not one of them, and I did not care. All I wanted was to hear what changes might affect the North Star project. The chief executive officer asked me to give a quick update on North Star's status for the week. I had prepared this in advance because I usually handled this part during major meetings. I shared my screen, opened the report, and started speaking. My voice was steady, clear, summarizing the essentials. Stable data flow, minor alerts resolved, transfer performance on target. A few faces nodded out of habit. About 1 minute in, my microphone icon went gray. I had been muted. I looked at the corner of my screen and tried to unmute, but nothing happened. Then Brandon's voice cut in, sharp and clipped, like he had been waiting for that exact moment. This part is not necessary anymore. We will follow a new direction. All changes will be shared later this week. The meeting fell silent. A few squares blinked. Some heads tilted, unsure they heard correctly. It was not a direct attack on my role, but it was enough to snap the thread of basic respect between people. Muting someone in a small meeting is rude. Muting them in a company-wide meeting in front of hundreds is a public slap. I stopped sharing my screen. No one said anything. Even the chief executive officer looked uncomfortable, but he let Brandon continue. Brandon moved on to a new slide loaded with bright colors and restructured charts he introduced like he was unveiling a revolution only he could see. What caught my attention next were the messages in the internal chat. Jake's message appeared first. Are you okay? What did he just do? Lena followed. Madison, be careful. This guy does not understand the system. Then a message from an older colleague, someone who almost never comments on internal matters. If he did that to you in the first meeting, he will do more. I read them one by one, my eyes still on Brandon's slide, while my mind slowly processed what just happened. This was not clumsiness. It was not the tactlessness of a newcomer. Brandon did it to stake his claim, to signal control. And to him, I was part of the old framework he wanted to replace. Before the meeting even ended, a new email arrived through the leadership channel. The subject line was simple. Note on North Star project. I opened it and read the forwarded message. It was a single sentence from a former senior leader who left the company last year, written to Brandon before the meeting. If you want to touch North Star, work with Madison first. She is the foundation. Strange how Brandon had received that message and ignored it completely. When the meeting ended, I turned off my camera and sat still for a few seconds. Nothing catastrophic had happened, but something had shifted. A thin thread of mutual respect had been cut cleanly by one click from Brandon, and I knew from that moment forward, nothing that followed would be accidental. It was a declaration of intent, even if he never said it out loud. I stood up, walked to my team's desks, keeping my expression steady. But deep inside, I could feel something subtle moving, like the faint tremor beneath the ground that warns of a much larger quake only I can hear coming. The days after that meeting shifted in a way I could feel with every step. Not loud or obvious, but a quiet undercurrent, like something deep beneath the surface had started to swirl. Brandon did not waste any time showing his new authority. In his very first week, he began what he called process innovation, though all I saw was the dismantling of systems that had been running smoothly for years. The first thing he did was remove me from the North Star meetings. I used to meet with the client at least twice a week to review updates and address their concerns. Then suddenly, the invites started going to another team. When I asked, Brandon brushed it off, saying he wanted to test a new communication model. Let younger staff lead so they could grow. It sounded generous, but the execution was far from it. Instead of trained personnel, he handed the meetings to people who had never worked directly with North Star. Some did not even understand their data handling protocols. Only a few days later, small system errors began to appear. First, the sync dashboard slowed down. Then the error analysis report displayed mismatched values. I knew exactly where the problem came from. The new tool Brandon forced the tech team to integrate. It had never been stress tested with a large data load, but Brandon claimed it would be a breakthrough. I did not react. I documented every issue, every timestamp, every ripple it caused. Every operational change leaves footprints if you know where to look. The first time North Star asked in their own meeting why they no longer saw me, I learned about it through a message from a colleague who attended. The message was simple. They asked about you. I did not know what to say. Then another message came through. Brandon told us to say you are moving to an internal role and will not attend meetings anymore. I read it and could not decide whether to laugh or sigh. Brandon was not only removing me from the work, but he was also controlling the narrative that employees were allowed to give the client. That afternoon, HR sent me an invitation titled Evaluation of Collaboration During Restructuring. I knew exactly what that meant. They would speak gently about cooperation, about new expectations under new leadership, about aligning with the shared vision. But what they truly wanted was to see whether I intended to resist or cause trouble for Brandon. I arrived on time, sat in the slightly too low chair in the small HR room, and listened to the familiar script. I nodded, calm, like I was observing someone else's conversation. 2 days later, Brandon called me into another meeting. Just the two of us and an HR representative as a witness. He called it a performance review, but the way he spoke felt more like he was trying to corner me, testing how I would react. He asked why certain system alerts were not resolved as fast as before. I explained they came from the new tool he had pushed through without proper testing, and that I had full documentation. Brandon cut me off immediately, saying that blaming the tool was a sign of resistance. I did not argue. I opened my notebook and wrote down every word. Brandon did not seem to remember that the meeting system automatically recorded audio under the very policy he himself introduced on his first day. That meant this meeting was not a conversation. It was evidence. Brandon continued talking about responsibility, about how operations needed to adapt faster, about how the old model no longer aligned with his vision. I kept writing, sometimes nodding. My silence frustrated him. He did not understand that some battles are best fought by not reacting at all. When I stepped out of that room, I knew I was being pushed down deliberately. Not because I lacked skill, but because Brandon wanted to eliminate anyone who did not conform to his authority. And clearly, I was not someone easily controlled. That night, long after the office lights had turned off, I stayed behind. The silence made the server fans in the next room sound louder. I opened my computer and accessed the contract storage folder, searching for the original North Star agreement. I had not touched it in years, but tonight, something old and instinctive urged me to read every clause again. I opened the file and watched the familiar lines appear. Each page felt like it pulled me back to the year. North Star requested that my name be written explicitly into the key personnel clause. I did not think much of it back then, but tonight, looking at that contract, I realized this was the first time in years I was reading it with purpose. I knew something inside this contract could change everything, and I also knew I was ready to find it. I sat alone in the nearly dark room, the only light coming from the screen reflecting across my face. The silence was so complete I could hear the steady hum of the ceiling vents. The North Star contract file lay open in front of me, dozens of pages I once knew by heart, but never imagined I would revisit with this level of precision. This contract was nothing like the standard agreement Sterling signed with other clients. It was a $14 million per year commitment, a number large enough that simply mentioning it made executives straighten their posture. For 6 years, North Star had been the company's most reliable source of revenue, and most of the trust behind that came from our system, never letting them down. I understood that completely, but I had never used it to negotiate my place. Responsibility meant more to me than any declaration. Tonight, I was rereading each line not to prepare for an argument, but to determine my true position inside the structure Brandon was trying so hard to break. I went through every page, from financial clauses to system guarantees to data transfer terms. With each scroll, memories of old negotiations came back. But the most important truth lived on page 32, and when I reached it, my eyes stopped instantly. Clause D, 7.1, Continuity of Named Personnel. I expanded the section and read each word slowly, not because I needed time to understand, but because I wanted to be absolutely sure I missed nothing. In the event that Madison Clark, the personnel named in this agreement, voluntarily terminates employment with Sterling Dynamics, North Star Utilities reserves the right to terminate the $14 million contract immediately with no obligation of compensation. My name sat in the center of that clause, clear as a pin, marking the real nature of the relationship between both sides. Sterling's system stability was tied to my presence, and North Star refused to operate without me. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. The clause was never meant to protect me, it was meant to protect North Star. But unintentionally, it had become the strongest leverage a single individual could possess in a corporate contract. A silent time bomb was placed on the boardroom table for 6 straight years, waiting for someone foolish enough to step on it. I remembered that negotiation vividly. North Star had just survived a severe failure in its energy coordination network. They were exhausted, worn down by cascading outages. When I helped them stabilize again, their chief technical officer said it plainly. We need Madison, not just her title. Sterling's leadership originally opposed naming personnel in the contract because it tied the company's hands. But North Star did not budge. No Madison, no contract. And because $14 million a year was too much for anyone to risk, they agreed. When I signed, I saw it as a gesture of immense trust. I never imagined it would become the line between stability and chaos. I returned to the page and read it again to be certain I was not imagining it. Brandon was stomping on a mine he did not even know existed. And worse, he was not the kind of person who read contracts closely. He lived in a world of slides and buzzwords, not in the world where a single line in a contract could determine the fate of an entire division. Realizing this, I began gathering everything I needed. Every email Brandon ignored, every error report he told the offshore team to overlook, every time he provided inaccurate information to North Star. I collected it all, neatly, with dates and exact sequence, not to attack, not to get revenge, but to protect myself if I ever needed to walk away. Then I took the most important step that night. I uploaded the original contract into the shared legal directory, the one all executives had access to. I did not annotate it. I did not add an email. I did not draw attention. I simply placed it there with a clear timestamp showing this was the original file from the year we signed it. A small act, but enough to line up the dominoes in the right order. I checked the time, nearly 10 at night. The office was unusually quiet. I turned off the monitor, gathered my things, and stood up. No one saw me walk out of that room, but maybe that was the moment everything truly began to shift. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and more importantly, when to do it. My exit plan started the moment I found Clause D, 7.1. Quiet. Precise. Not a sound made, but enough to shift the path of a $14 million contract. What happened after I found Clause D, 7.1 felt like standing on an old wooden bridge and feeling every plank shift under my feet. I was not the one making it shake. Brandon was, and the more desperate he became to make his mark, the harder those planks trembled. Exactly 1 week after the internal performance review, Brandon launched what he called Phase 2 of restructuring. In the email sent to the entire operations division, He wrote that the company needed to cut costs, speed up delivery, and stay competitive through an offshore first model. When I finished reading it, I let out a small, quiet laugh. Those words sounded like the kind of justification anyone with no real experience would use to shift risk somewhere else. The operations meeting that followed showed exactly how determined he was. He presented brightly colored slides about moving a significant amount of our workload to a low-cost offshore team halfway around the world. That team had never handled North Star data and was not even cleared to access all documentation due to security restrictions. But Brandon kept preaching about cost optimization and flexibility. In his mind, the word flexible could replace any complex requirement a client had. I did not react. I simply took notes, partly because no one asked for my opinion, partly because I understood that my time to speak would come, just not yet. Then the inevitable happened. One morning, the main dashboard lit up with a red alert, not a yellow warning or a slow query. A solid red alert, the kind that only appears when a client's data is at risk of serious disruption. I opened the logs, and within seconds, I knew exactly what had happened. A primary pipeline had been altered incorrectly by the offshore team. They used the new tool Brandon forced into the system, but their configuration was incompatible with North Star's data environment. A few milliseconds of mismatch were enough to stall the entire flow. North Star called immediately. I could hear the tension in their voices as they explained their inability to pull real-time data. Several of their departments were relying on that data to forecast load. I sat down and handled it the way I always did. I rerouted the traffic, reset several retrieval branches, and removed the faulty configuration the offshore team had inserted. In less than 20 minutes, the system returned to stability. I sent the incident report to legal as protocol required, but this time they responded within minutes. An emergency meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. During the meeting, the chief legal officer told Brandon directly that implementing the new tool and shifting work offshore without client approval had created significant risk. I listened quietly, hands resting near the keyboard. Brandon, however, did not back down. He spoke slowly, using the same polished words he always used to hide the irresponsibility behind them. We have to innovate to stay competitive. Risk is part of growth. Even as he said it, I kept a calm expression. But inside, I felt his blindness more clearly than ever. Brandon was using innovation like a cape to cover the fact that he understood nothing about what North Star actually needed. A mid-level manager cut in, asking the exact question I had been waiting for since the incident occurred. Has North Star approved any of this? Silence filled the room. Brandon looked directly at him and answered with confidence so sharp it bordered on arrogance. They will have to. One sentence, and the chief legal officer raised his eyebrow in that particular way that meant he had heard a warning bell. Brandon refused to acknowledge. It was the second time I had seen that reaction from him. It was the expression of someone who understood that a person was about to harm themselves while believing they were winning. I returned to my desk and continued working through the last traces of the incident. Watching the data streams gradually settle, I could not ignore the contrast between us. I was cleaning up the damage with the precision of someone who understood every inch of the system. And Brandon, the person responsible for the chaos, was probably standing somewhere, presenting his new vision as if the consequences of that vision did not belong to him. Around 3 in the afternoon, a new company-wide email arrived. The subject line was long and polished, like every email Brandon wrote. Announcement of the grand restructuring phase. A Zoom meeting will be held on Monday morning. Brandon would present the plan for the upcoming year, including the offshore model, the new tool stack, and the redistribution of roles across the organization. I read the email twice. Not because I needed clarity, I understood everything on the first read. I went through it again to confirm what my instincts were already telling me. Brandon believed he had full control and was ready to unveil his new model to the entire company. But I knew my moment in this story was approaching. I closed the email, leaned back in my chair, and let my eyes rest for a few seconds. I did not feel anger. I did not feel insulted. I felt clarity, because reading that email told me the time had finally come. All I needed to do now was prepare and wait for that Monday morning. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, not because I needed extra preparation. Everything had been ready since last week. I simply wanted to sit in this familiar space one last time, to look at the screens that had been part of my life for 6 years. Habit made me open the data dashboard like I did every morning, even though I knew that after today, that dashboard would no longer belong to me. At 8:54, the meeting reminder appeared. The company-wide Zoom would begin at 9 sharp. The event Brandon had proudly named the Grand Restructuring. I clicked the link, and the screen immediately split into hundreds of squares. People turned on their cameras, their faces carrying a mix of curiosity and tension. Word was that today's meeting would affect many departments. I noticed several senior leaders sitting in private offices, a few investors joining remotely, and the chief legal officer's square in the top corner, expression cold as always. At exactly 9, Brandon appeared. This time he wore a black suit, a light tie, his face lit up as if he was about to present the defining chapter of his career. He opened the slide deck. The familiar words appeared again in even larger fonts and brighter colors: lean ops, offshore first, next gen infrastructure, hyper efficient allocation. His voice was full of confidence, with a hint of concealed excitement. In his mind, this meeting was proof that he finally owned the room. For the first few minutes, I kept my camera off. I sat still, my hands resting on the two things I had prepared the night before: my badge and my signed resignation letter. Everything was timed perfectly. Not early, not late. Brandon reached the part about redistributing roles across the entire operations division. I heard him mention phrases like flat structure, reduced management layers, space for younger talent, and removal of outdated models. Anyone with sense understood what he meant. I belonged to that so-called outdated model. At 9:01 and 30 seconds, Brandon moved to the next slide and talked about how Sterling needed courage to change. He emphasized the word courage twice. I turned on my camera. There was no sound to signal it, just a dark square that lit up in the middle of the screen. I sat straight, hiding nothing. My right hand raised my badge, my left hand held my resignation letter, and behind me was the simple background I prepared the night before, showing a clear line of text: effective at 9:01 a.m. I did not speak. I did not need to. The Zoom call fell silent in a way that made me hear my own heartbeat. Hundreds of squares froze like statues. Some eyes widened. Some hands covered mouths. Some people leaned closer to the screen as if to make sure they were seeing correctly. A manager in the lower right corner whispered two words, quiet but loud enough for everyone to hear. Oh no. Brandon froze. His mouth was open mid-sentence, but the words never made it out. He tried to recover, lifting a hand to adjust his tie, but I could see each of his fingers shaking. His voice broke through the silence, but it no longer sounded smooth. We can, we can discuss this privately. I did not answer. I looked straight into the camera. My eyes held no anger, no sarcasm, only the clarity of someone who had already made their final decision. I did not glance left or right. I did not look down. I stayed silent. The kind of silence is sharper than any argument. The chief legal officer reacted first. He did not speak. He simply leaned closer to the screen to read the letter in my hand. Once he confirmed the signature and the date, he closed his laptop in the middle of the meeting. The motion was so fast that many people did not even notice until he stood up and left the room. There was only one reason for that. He was calling North Star. Seeing that made Brandon panic even more. He tried to continue talking, but each sentence came out rushed and hopeless. I no longer heard every word clearly because by then, the only sound that existed for me was the silence swallowing the meeting. At exactly 9:01, I hit leave meeting. I disappeared from the screen. 1 second present, the next second gone. The way I left did more than shock the room. It made them feel the finality of my decision. Less than a minute later, Slack exploded with notifications. Messages are pouring in. Internal channels are lighting up. Links to the original contract opening everywhere. Clause D, 7.1, being discussed in private chats. A few people pinged me, even though they knew I would not respond. In the meeting room, Brandon attempted to regain control. I was not there to see it, but those who were said he opened his mouth 3 times without forming a single complete sentence. His hand shook so badly he had to hide it under the table. The pen he held slipped from his fingers, and he could not pick it up. I left the company in silence. No drama, no speech, no final statement. But my silence echoed louder than anything Brandon had ever tried to assert. The entire game shifted in 20 seconds, and I knew it was only the beginning. I left the Zoom meeting that morning with a strange kind of calm, not relief and not satisfaction, just the sense that I had placed the final stone exactly where it needed to go. I knew Clause D 7.1 was not a threat, it was a switch, and I had just turned it on. Exactly 21 hours later, the first explosion hit. I was sitting in my apartment with soft music playing, getting ready to clear my desk, when my phone vibrated. It was not Sterling, not a coworker. It was someone I used to work with at North Star. The message held only 4 words. Check your email now. I opened my laptop. My inbox was filled with automated notices and a few thank you messages from former colleagues. But right in the center of the screen was an email whose subject line told me everything before I even opened it. Subject: Activation of Clause D 7.1, Immediate Termination of Contract. North Star did not write much. They cited the clause, confirmed that the named personnel had voluntarily departed, and declared, the $14 million annual contract terminated immediately. No compensation, no delay, no renegotiation. 4 lines. The end of 6 years of partnership, and the end of Brandon's career at Sterling, even if he did not know it yet. Across the city, in Sterling's executive wing, that email landed in the chief executive officer's inbox at exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. He called an emergency meeting on the spot. The chaos that followed was exactly as I imagined it, even though I was no longer there to see it. A friend in legal told me the chief executive officer walked into the room with a tight expression, so severe that the overhead lights reflected sharply off his forehead. His voice stayed controlled, but the pressure leaked through every word. Explain this. How did we lose a $14 million contract less than a day after the restructuring meeting? The chief legal officer placed the contract packet on the table. He spoke slowly, clearly, each word meant to carve the truth into the room. Clause D 7.1 is fully valid. North Star has every right to terminate if the named personnel resign. I warned Brandon multiple times about altering any part of the North Star structure. He ignored all of them. The room fell into a heavy silence. No one spoke. No one objected. Everything was too obvious. Brandon had not just made a mistake. He had opened the door to disaster through pure, blind confidence. A major investor attending remotely slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked through the microphone like hitting stone. Who allowed him to remove the named personnel in the contract? Who approved the restructuring without reading the clauses? No one answered. No one dared, because the real answer was simple. No one. Brandon acted alone, and everyone let him. Right after the meeting, the chief executive officer had to send an update to the company, negotiating to acquire Sterling. A deal worth hundreds of full millions was on the line. But only a few hours after North Star's email, the potential buyer replied with a short message. All discussions are paused until Sterling can prove operational stability. In truth, an indefinite freeze. The company's valuation dropped that same day. Internal shares held by senior leadership lost over 1/3 of their value before noon. Longtime employees began questioning the future of Sterling. And when the strongest people in a company no longer feel safe, they do what instinct tells them to do. They resign. Less than 48 hours after North Star's email, HR received nearly 30 resignation notices in a single day. In operations alone, 4 key personnel requested transfers or exits. But the biggest blast came from Slack. No one knew who leaked the email. Maybe someone in legal, maybe someone in ops, maybe someone who simply could not tolerate Brandon for another minute. But a screenshot suddenly appeared in the main chat. An email from the founder to the board. You muted the named person. No subject line, no introduction, no criticism. Just 6 words, enough to capture all the stupidity of what Brandon had done. Slack erupted. Channels spun out. People gossiped, posted memes, sent reactions, then went silent. Silent because everyone understood the company had just plunged into its lowest point. At that moment, leadership had no choice. They issued a formal announcement. Brandon Hale was suspended immediately pending an internal investigation. Minutes later, Brandon's Slack account vanished. His email is disabled. His system access was wiped clean. Even his badge no longer activated the internal elevators, as if the company wanted to erase every trace of him as quickly as possible. Then Sterling fell into a strange quiet, a silence that held no peace, the silence of a building whose foundation had just been yanked out, waiting to see which part would collapse next. I was no longer there to witness it, but what came to me through old colleagues, through messages, through leaked emails, was enough for me to understand that the dominoes had already fallen. And once they fall, no one can stop them. I was just the one who walked away. They were the ones who pushed the entire system over the edge with their own hands. I thought that after a departure as explosive as mine, I would need weeks to settle myself, to sort through emotions, to figure out what came next. But reality was different. I left Sterling so lightly that even I was surprised. There was no anger, no bitterness, no desire for revenge. I simply walked away from a place where my role was complete. Whatever happened afterward belonged to them, not to me. On my first day without Sterling, I slept until 8 in the morning, something I had not done in 6 years. No alarm blaring from my phone, no flashing data alerts on a screen. I made coffee slowly, opened the window to let the light fill my apartment. No fear of missing an emergency call, no sense of being permanently on alert. I realized I had forgotten what it felt like to live my own life. By noon, I opened LinkedIn just to update that I was no longer working at Sterling. No long post, no story, no photo, no lessons learned. I simply adjusted my title. 10 minutes later, the notifications started. Messages from tech companies, messages from former colleagues, messages from consulting firms. A friend at a major financial company wrote, "If you want a change of scenery, we really need someone like you." A technical director at an energy firm wrote, "Tell me when you are ready to talk." Interview requests lined up faster than I could read them. But among all those messages, one stood out: North Star Utilities. "We would like to speak with Madison about a new collaboration opportunity." I was not surprised, but I still felt a warmth I could not quite name. I replied that same day and received an invitation for an in-person meeting the next morning. The meeting took place at North Star's new office in a small, bright conference room lined with power grid maps and energy charts. Their representative was Tanya, the person who had worked closely with me during the emergency stabilization years ago. The same sharp eyes, but softened today. She walked in, not shaking hands right away, just looking at me for a few seconds as if to confirm I was really there. "Madison, it has been too long." She smiled. We sat down. Tanya did not circle around anything. "We know what happened at Sterling. Actually, that Zoom moment was told to me before the contract was even terminated. And I have to say this: I respect the way you left. Very much." I nodded in thanks. She continued, "For 6 years, you kept our system running without interruption. Many of our highest level decisions relied on the accuracy you maintained. You never asked for anything, but we knew it. North Star was never loyal to Sterling. North Star was loyal to the person who understood our system best. It was not a compliment, it was the truth." Tanya opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. "We want to offer you a senior consulting role for our upcoming data system overhaul. Or, if you prefer something more permanent, we have a new partner expanding operations, and they want you to lead their operational transformation project. You can choose either direction. Both doors are open." I stayed silent for a moment. All those years of working in the shadows rose up with a clarity I had never felt at Sterling. My value had never come from a title, and it had never depended on who allowed or did not allow me to speak. It came from the skill I built piece by piece, from the trust I earned during 3 a.m. calls, from the years I kept systems alive through crisis after crisis. Tanya added one last thing before we wrapped up. "And Madison, if you still think silence is weakness, don't. It is what makes you different. Not everyone has the strength to stay silent at the right moment." I left the room with an unfamiliar feeling, not victory, but release. I had stepped away from a place where I no longer belonged. No more proving myself to people who never valued me. No more being forced into silence in absurd meetings. I chose the new partnership with North Star. Not for the money, though the salary was double, not for the prestige, but because they had respected me from the first day to the last. In my first week at the new job, I set up a small desk, placed a green plant beside my computer. I no longer stayed up late, saving a crashing system caused by someone else's poor decisions. I no longer had to shield an entire department. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just holding the line. My spirit felt lighter, yet stronger than before. Not strong in the combative sense, strong in the way clarity feels. I knew exactly where my value lived and who actually saw it. As for Sterling, they realized that value far too late. I adjusted to the new rhythm of my life faster than I expected. Walking into my new office each morning, I no longer carried that heavy, invisible weight that had pressed against my shoulders for years. People greeted one another with an ease that felt natural, not with the tight nods of those who were always afraid of being wrong. I sat at my desk, opened my computer, made a hot cup of tea, and reviewed the tasks for the day. Everything was clear, transparent, and within my control. Only a few weeks into my new job, I realized my body had changed. I slept deeply, no longer jolting awake in the middle of the night from dreams of blinking system alerts. I ate better, felt sharper. People often say you only realize how much pressure you carried once you finally step out of it. And truly, after leaving Sterling, I understood how long I had lived under stress so constant it had begun to feel normal. One Friday afternoon, as I was about to end my first week of work without having to fix a single crisis, the receptionist walked over with a large bouquet wrapped in elegant paper. The deep red flowers stood out in the room. I was surprised. Hardly anyone knew the address of my new office, and no project had just ended that would justify a client sending flowers. She placed the bouquet on my desk. Her expression was curious. "Someone sent this for you." No sender name. I opened the small card tucked in the bouquet. The handwriting was familiar, just two short lines. "If you want to come back, Sterling Dynamics will do it your way. Let me know." No signature, but I knew exactly who sent it, not Brandon. He no longer had power or position to say anything of that sort, not HR. They had no reason. The only person with enough authority and enough desperation to write those words was the chief executive officer. I read the card twice. No anger, no confusion, just a quiet certainty, like seeing a door that once hurt you open again and feeling absolutely no desire to walk through it. I folded the card and opened in my desk drawer. Inside was a small space where I kept things not to hold on to them, but to remind myself of what had passed. I placed the card there beside the printed copy of Clause D 7.1, the contract that had protected me exactly when I needed it. I closed the drawer. No lock, no drama, just placing things where they belonged. From across the room, a colleague asked if I wanted to join the team for dinner. I smiled, stood up, and said I would be right there. As I walked around the desk, I glanced at the bouquet once more, not to consider contacting Sterling, but to remind myself that a place that does not value you cannot fix that truth with flowers, no matter how many they send. On my way to the elevator, I thought about Sterling, about the years I had given, the sleepless nights, the emergency calls, the times I held the system together while it threatened to fall apart. Then I thought about my final days there, the muting in the meeting, the ignored warnings, the belief that everything revolved around the hollow vision of someone who never understood how the system truly worked. Sterling did not fall because I left. Sterling fell because they treated the foundation of their system as something replaceable. An organization can be full of ambition, full of plans, full of colorful slides, but when they fail to understand the value of the person holding the structure together, they eventually destroy themselves. I did not need to shout to prove it. I did not need to argue. I did not need long emails or public statements. I only needed to stand up at the right moment and let my silence carry its own weight. That evening, when I returned home, I brewed a cup of tea, opened the window, and let the wind move through the room. There was no breaking sound inside me. No regret weighs me down. Only peace, the kind that comes after stepping out of a storm that lasted far too long. I looked out the window, the city lights reflecting in my eyes, and whispered something I had never said aloud to anyone but myself. I never needed to raise my voice. I just needed to stand up at the right time and let them hear the sound of their own collapse.